All right. Our third lecture in environmental science deals with the nature of science, revolves around the scientific method. Our guiding question for this section of the chapter asks us, what does it mean to do science? So that is what we are going to focus on in this entire section. And we'll do a lot more discussion with this when we do our scientific method lab. So the nature of science. Science itself is to try and have this understanding of our natural world. And if you could see there, the word science comes from the Latin word scientia, which means knowledge. So to understand science is to have knowledge, an understanding of how our world works. So what science is and is not. Science is an organized way of studying the natural world and the knowledge gained from such studies. And that system that we use is referred to as the scientific method. Science assumes that the natural world functions in accordance with rules that do not change. Science does not deal with the supernatural because when you study the supernatural, you cannot have factual information to back up your findings. Where in science, everything is supported through research and data and generated facts. Science relies, therefore, on the evidence from measurements and observations. Remember that observations are collecting data through your senses. Scientific ideas are supported, not proven or accepted, or not believed in. They're supported through the measurements and observations that are taken as a scientist follows this organized method of studying the natural world. So science involves asking questions, making observations, seeking evidence, sharing ideas, and analyzing results. However, when you study the scientific method, you often think of first, form the problem, second, state the hypothesis, third, design a controlled experiment, fourth, record and analyze data, fifth, draw your conclusions. And that's kind of been drilled. That process has been drilled in your head all through elementary school, all through middle school, and even at the high school level. Your teachers teach it to you as though it's a linear process, and it's not linear. Science is not a linear process. The process loops back on itself and follows many different paths. So you don't always have to come forward and follow those steps when you're doing your research, but in some form or another, you do those steps. Science is dynamic, creative endeavor. It's a dynamic, creative endeavor. Exploration and discovery. Many investigations start with observations, by observing what's going on and collecting data using the senses. With observation of a phenomenon that is the scientist wishes to explain. So there's some sense of curiosity there. The science has some sense of curiosity and is willing to ask questions on why something may occur, or what is it that causes a certain pattern seen in nature. So observations can be made with the eye, with using instruments, or by reading scientific literature. Observations can happen unexpectedly or be planned. And observations may also lead to questions that may be shared with other colleagues. So once you make the observation, then you go ahead and form your hypotheses. And scientists tend to answer the questions by devising hypotheses that must be testable ideas. So you must, in order to have a true hypothesis, it must be testable. So, what do we know about a hypothesis in a scientific experiment? A hypothesis is a statement that explains a phenomenon or answers a scientific question. A hypothesis generates predictions that can be checked with models or direct observation. A prediction is the expected observation if the hypothesis is true. It can be supported or rejected by the data. Remember, it can't be proven, it can't be accepted, it's either supported or rejected. And a hypothesis may also prompt other new hypotheses. So from there, you want to start designing your experiment to gather data. So scientists test their predictions by gathering evidence in the form of data. And there are two types of data you can collect in science. There is data that is qualitative in nature, and that would be descriptive data. And then you also have data that is quantitative in nature, and quantitative data is numerical based. So if data matches predictions, hypotheses are supported. If the data does not match a prediction, the hypothesis is rejected. Data can come from an experiment or observational studies. Ideally, experiments and studies are controlled and repeated. So here is a did you know fact. Goals are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and the government agencies, like the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, continually collect data on seagull populations and habitats. So we'll go through and we'll do a lot more discussion with Section 2 and the scientific process. We'll talk a little bit more about developing strong hypothesis statements. We'll look at data types and do examples. We'll talk about graphing and measurements and statistical analysis, and then how a scientist then carries that out and later shows the scientific community how they communicate their data. Our last section of the chapter is Lesson 3, and this talks about the community of science. And the guiding question in this section, which is our last section, is what happens to a scientific study after data have been gathered and the results are analyzed? So scientific research does not stop with the scientific method. In order to have any impact, scientists must be able to share their work at conferences and in journals, and they receive and incorporate feedback from them. So a community analysis and feedback. After completing their study, scientists present their work and get feedback from other researchers at conferences. They write papers about their studies in scientific journals, in the newspaper. They'll publish some of their findings. You see some of their findings on the news, and then they submit papers for publication in their scientific journals. Many journals are peer-reviewed by scientists that are in the scientific community that are focused in the same type of research that they are doing, meaning scientists review papers submitted for publication. They'll recommend changes to each other and reject or accept the paper for publication. Replication and self-correction. Hypotheses should be tested several times in several ways before they are accepted by the scientific community. Interpretations of data can change over time as knowledge accumulates, and sometimes reinterpretations can be drastic, but most of the time they are minor adjustments to an accepted idea. Scientists constantly refine and improve themselves. So, did you know that scientists believe the sun and planets revolved around the Earth until Nicholas Copernicus proved this was false in the 1500s? So here's an example of one idea that was accepted among the people, that the sun and planets revolved around Earth, and now today we realize that that's not true. It's indeed that the planets revolve around the sun. What is a scientific theory? A hypothesis that is a testable explanation for a narrow set of phenomena, while a theory is a broader explanation for a wider range of observations. Both hypotheses and theories must be testable and supported by multiple lines of evidence, and they must be able to be replicated to be accepted by the scientific community. So, building on environmental science, addressing environmental problems involves more than just understanding the science. It involves ethics, which is the study of behavior, good and bad, right and wrong, moral principles and values. It's understanding of culture. It's an ensemble of knowledge, beliefs, values, and learned ways of life shared by a group of people. And you also get this worldview perspective, so the perception of the world and the person's place in it. So in environmental science, with this kind of definition here on environmental problem solving, you could truly see why environmental scientists really are in the field as interdisciplinary people, studying many aspects of science, social sciences, so on and so forth, to get a full understanding of the issues that they are trying to solve. So what is environmental ethics? Environmental ethics, and the picture there kind of illustrates basically what each of these three things are. As they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So if you look, you can see as you go from anthropocentric to biocentric to ecocentric, you increase the viewpoint. So environmental ethics is the application of ethical standards to the relationship between humans and the environment. And if you have an anthropocentric viewpoint, humans and human welfare is most important in value. If you have a biocentric viewpoint, all living things have value. Some may be more important than others, so you may place a little bit more value on the human aspect than other aspects. And then the last environmental ethic would be ecocentric, and the ecocentric ethic means that well-being of a species or a community is more important than that of any individual. So in ecocentric, you look at the whole picture of the environment, both biotic and abiotic components. Environmental justice. The environmental justice movement recognizes the quality of life connected to environmental quality. It promotes fair and equitable treatment of all people regarding environmental policies and practice. So this is all for chapter 1. We'll go over this a little bit more and start studying for your test.